Councilwoman Gibson,
Present.
and Councilman Green,
Present.
and myself, Chairperson West. We're all in attendance. I'd like to have a call for approval of the meeting minutes.
So moved.
Second.
Okay, before we fully approve it, I have a correction to make. It was my fault that in the last meeting minutes, I mentioned, spoke about an LLC, owners being under an LLC at 25th and Edgemont, and that was an error on my part. It should have been 25th and Providence. So I'd like to note that change, and we can move forward with approving the minutes with that change.
Noted.
So all in,
Councilwoman, you might want to say the date of the minutes still.
it was September 9th, 2024, those meeting minutes. Okay. All in favor of approving the meeting minutes from September 9th, 2024 with that one correction?
Aye.
Okay, so moved, so properly moved, seconded, and approved. Okay, now we will have public comment on agenda items only. Anyone from the public with any comments? Hearing none, we're going to have a presentation by the Public Works Department head on amending ordinance 901.13 entitled Backfilling and Repaving. The sponsors are the administration, and the department head is Andrew Heyman.
Good afternoon, Council. Thank you for having me today.
Good afternoon.
As we discussed in the previous committee meeting, this is the final draft of the ordinance requiring contractors to repave the road from curb to curb when they do road work with certain guidelines. I think I discussed it in the last meeting. I can go grab a copy and read it if you want me to read it again. But this requires them to do that work. Right now, the ordinance doesn't specifically say that they have to do that. This new ordinance that I presented to you would mean that that contractors would be required to pave curb to curb.
I'm sorry.
Go ahead.
My only question, how are we going to be notify the contractors? Because I know probably contractors that have already been familiar with the city, if they break ground, they're probably only doing that specific spot. So now with this new ordinance, is there a way that we can get the word out there, or how will we notify the contractors that a new ordinance is passed and these are the new requirements?
So I would recommend that first putting this up on eCode and making sure the update is there so that the contractors can find it online. Then I would also speak to administrative staff in my department and as necessary in the L&I department just to make sure that when a contractor comes in to apply for some work that they're aware. I don't handle the paperwork personally, so I apologize. I'm not familiar with exactly where on the paperwork it says that. That way contractors know when they come in to do work what the expectation is. And again, if a contractor comes in and does, say, one home sewer lateral or something like that, it wouldn't require them to repave curb to curb generally. It's really more for larger projects. So it would be a limited number of instances where this ordinance would be triggered. But in those cases, it would be a significant area. So we should be aware of them when they come through. But like I said, the ordinance, that information should be reflected on our administrative paperwork here in-house when they apply. And the last thing I would say is that many municipalities are moving to adopt ordinances similar to this one. This is copy-paste from what, essentially from what I implemented in Fallcroft a couple years ago, and I know Port Arbor's done the same thing. So many contractors, particularly utilities, will be familiar with this, and typically it's not much of it's not a hard transition to make, in my experience.
Thank you.
No problem.
The question I have is it, you said curb to curb, but is it only going to be specifically for small projects, or large projects?
So this is for, generally speaking, for larger projects. So what it really says is if you're doing a bunch of curb cuts, the layman's terms of it would be if you're doing a bunch of cuts in a certain area, or you're cutting a large trench, you're replacing a big sewer line, instead of doing from the middle of the road to the end of the road to the edge, you're doing from just both curb to curb. So smaller projects really would typically not be affected by this ordinance at all. It would only really be the larger projects in the city.
Okay, thank you.
No problem.
In my opinion, because I've seen a number of roads that contractors have worked on, and they repair whatever it is they're going to repair, but then they leave our roads with patches. And the roads, I call them mismatched. You got a lighter type of repaving over here, darker over here. Sometimes one side is higher than the other. And I think our roads should be put back the way that we need them to be put back, because sometimes when they're not done curve to curve, we end up with sinkholes too, because the grading is different, the backfill is different. So we need everything to be in concert, one with the other, so that our roads will be fully repaired as it pertains to the overlay and especially the backfill, because that's where we're running. And we have a situation in the middle of Curlin Street now at 11th, and it's a sinkhole there. We're waiting for PennDOT, is it, or someone to come and repair it. But, you know, the backfill, and I've seen it, I'm not speaking from something that I don't know about, is the backfill is always different. You know, you get different companies, they use different types of backfill. So this is causing a problem on our streets, and we want to resolve the problem, I would think, on our streets so that they will look uniform and not cause us any future problems with sinkholes.
And just so council members are aware, this is for final restoration of the roadway. You may see a situation, and I have seen, where a contractor, a utility comes through and they chop open the road in a number of places. They can't finish the project in that given day. So you may still see instances where there's a trench on one side of a street in Chester, or a series of holes because they're doing work at a number of households. But there will be instances where contractors have to open it several times because they're not able to finish the work for whatever reason. In some of those cases, they'll choose to fill the hole back in, cover it up, rather than putting a plate on it, especially if it's a larger area. So that way it's not one gigantic metal plate. And then they'll reopen it again and go back in and do the final restoration work. So you may still see some of that. When that project is concluded, this requires the vendor, or the utility, I can't speak today, this requires the utility to pave curb to curb. And as you know, another explanation for it, and the other angle, is that when we're opening a roadway in Chester, you're damaging the whole roadway, even if you're not touching that specific portion of it. It degrades faster. The seals, like Councilmember just mentioned, don't last as long. Things have to be resealed. Sometimes there are different grades. So you're really damaging and increasing degradation to the whole roadway. And so this is just repairing the whole roadway. It's part of the same utility project, and you know, that's the argument, that's the explanation for it, I would say.
So my question now is, you and I had a discussion about the utility company that's outside
Yeah.
on Concord. So how would they do curb to curb when it's not, it's no curb to curb there?
So there's grass on the other side there.
It's grass, right?
Look, I think the term that's used in the ordinance, I think, says cartway. So it's really just the actual surface of the road. And there may not be very literally a curb on the other side, but it would be for the surface of the road. So cartway is probably a better way to say it.
Say it again, cartway?
Yeah, cartway. And again, in that project, I'm still waiting to hear back from ULS, but in instances like that may also not require them to be paved curb to curb, depending on the project. So I just don't have more information about it yet. But
Thank you.
yeah, no problem.
Are there any other comments or questions? Do you have anything else you'd like to add, Mr. Heyman?
I do not, council members. Thank you so much for having me here today. We appreciate your consideration for this ordinance. I think this would be very beneficial to the community, and I appreciate your consideration. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you. I know in the, Mr. Heyman, it's not on the agenda, but in the last meeting, we did speak about maybe, having, getting some additional help in public works so that we can help out with the property maintenance issues. So I'd just like to make mention of that it was discussed in the last meeting, but we're tabling it now because of some personnel changes, and it will be looked at and reviewed by those in leadership, and a determination will be made at a later date. I'd just like to make mention of that in this meeting.
That's all correct, Councilwoman, yes.
Are there any public, I see we just were joined by someone from the public. Any questions that you might have, or anyone? Not trying to put you on the spot.
Do you want to use the microphone? Sorry.
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
Quick question. In the ordinance, what dimensions will they be required to do curb to curb? Because that, I think, is important, and I think that we may also need to make sure that that specifies, because I didn't see it.
It's in there.
It says here.
Yeah.
I can read it if you want.
Sure.
So it says, the permittee shall include base repair, surface milling, and overlay. That's just obviously standard repaving for the width of the cartway, to include edge of paving to edge of paving for greater of the entire block of 100 lineal feet under any of the following circumstances. 1, where the street has been overlaid within the most recent 5 years. 2, when openings of more than 25 square feet have been made within 200 linear feet of the pavement. And 3, where an opening of 50 continuous linear feet has been made. So those would be the guidelines. If someone does any one of those things, it could be triggered.
So the first one said 5 years?
Yes.
Or is it the 5 years for all, is the 5 years the basis for the curb to curb regardless?
5 years, if it's 5 years and they're opening the road, then they're expected to pave it curb to curb.
Okay, so that's the baseline.
Yes.
So if
Well, any one of these things. So it could be that, or it could be where the opening is 25 square feet, or it could be 50 continuous linear feet, or it could be all three in theory.
Right, so let's just say, let's take the 25 square feet as an example,
Mhm.
right? Are they required to do 25 square feet across the entire curb to curb? Or, so can they just do their opening and then do a strip? That's what I'm trying to get clarity on. Because it doesn't seem like it addresses that, and I don't want us to pass something where we have a vendor who then comes out and they technically did do curb to curb, but not at the same linear width in which they dug, if that makes sense.
I can get you a little more information about it.
And I'm not trying to complicate either.
No,
I
not
just
complicating at all. Not at all.
wanted to get some clarity
Hold on.
for my own understanding.
So it says, it just says for the greater of the entire block of 100 feet, so I would take that to mean that it has to be a strip that's pretty significant, but I want to get, I'll get a little more clarity about the interpretation of that wording for you.
Because I think that it's one thing to put it in place, it's another thing to enforce it, and it's another thing to ensure that if an individual violates, that we
Sure.
have measures in place to determine what qualified as a violation. That's it. I don't have anything. I'm gonna go back to my seat.
That's a very good question. I can get you that information. I interpret this to mean that first section of the paragraph to mean that this paragraph to mean that they're talking about a stripe across the roadway to be the majority of that block. So, but I could certainly speak to our engineer and Nail and I department just to confirm that that's also their interpretation and get back to you.
And then in that, has it addressed violations? Or like what's gonna be the enforcement mechanism?
Well, I would think the enforcement mechanism in this case would be that you don't get a permit. So I would say like unlike a property maintenance violation or something like that, where the city is saying you're not compliant, you need to become in compliance. In this case, we wouldn't issue a permit unless that's an understood part.
You wouldn't issue a permit for future work because we already issued the permit for them to do that.
Well, if they've already done gotten a permit, then that's a separate situation. But if they're doing something going forward, so once this ordinance is implemented, then the city would, it would be part of the agreement, the contract agreement. I don't handle the administrative side, but they wouldn't be able to say they're not doing it. And it would be, again, I don't handle the administrative work, so I don't even know what the document looks like offhand, but I can get that.
I want to make sure that they, because I don't know if you follow where I'm going with this, but if a person applies for the permit
Mhm.
and they're aware that they have to do curb to curb, and then they don't do it at the expectation in which the ordinance is supposed to make them, or that their interpretation is supposed to be, what is the consequence? Do we not issue them permits moving forward, or like, that's where for me, it's just ensuring that when we put these things in place,
Mhm.
that we're creating a space for people to comply, and then we're providing consequences when people don't.
So I would think that,
Isn't that something our field inspector, because they're there the whole time inspecting the work. They're there before they start, and the expectations are communicated to them, and then they're there during the course of the work. And then before they complete, then the field inspector has to be called back. And I know what you're saying
Yeah.
about enforcement, but we do have someone on site that's there. Is that Mr. Red, Mr. Right, he's
I
the
think
field inspector.
what Joy is trying to say, or is saying that all of this should be spelled out in the ordinance, so that way, everyone is clear, and whatever before it's passed, that it's in the ordinance. Is that what we're getting to?
It helps to ensure that there's a point of reference, and when we're making adjustments and amendments, one of the things that we run into is that sometimes the ordinance contradicts themselves. So if you're going to put something in place, I was just suggesting,
Yeah.
Yeah.
take it back, and the committee can make the decision to ensure that there's cohesiveness and there's no room for misinterpretation or contradiction.
So I would just say that, again, a violation of a city ordinance, which, and I agree, I've seen contradictory things in there myself, so I understand that definitely. But that's more an overall, if a contractor or a vendor or somebody's doing work and they don't have permits, or they haven't done the work, or there's some other area where they're in violation, that there could definitely be, I'm a big believer, Councilwoman West can say, I think, can confirm that there's always room to have more teeth to deal with them. And I definitely have seen a lot of projects that I would call, off the record, sketchy, that where the permits, ordinances haven't necessarily been followed or may not have been. So, those same rules that govern other ordinances, permits that are issued by the city should be the same ones that would be enforced here. They could always be strengthened. This is more just the guidelines they're required to follow if they're in violation of this when they do the work, or they don't complete it, which is why typically, again, don't handle the administrative side, but they typically are required to provide a contract that shows the scope of the work, what they're doing. They've got to repave it curb to curb. The city would not issue, or should not issue, a permit to a contractor who hasn't complied with this ordinance, or any other city ordinance for that matter. And if the city does issue a permit, and it is said in the contract that the scope of work covers the city's ordinances, addresses the needs in the city's ordinances, and then the contractor does not do the thing that they're supposed to do, then that's when we head to the violation stage, and that's when the inspector, Mr. Red, or it could be another inspector, if there was someone in that position, would then go out and say, hey, you're in violation, and then fines and fees and things like that. I would think a contractor can be prohibited from getting a permit if they don't comply with city ordinances, but that's not my section, so I don't want to speak in definitives. But definitely agree with that, and yeah, I mean, I totally understand it. I would just say with this ordinance, happy to get more information if council members would prefer it, but with this ordinance, it's just the specifications themselves.
I have another question, Councilwoman. Who is Mr. Hood?
He's our field inspector, Don,
Okay.
you know him. He's tall guy that works down there, and he sits out in the outer area outside of Andrew's office, Don Truitt.
Okay, yes. And you said he's at every, inspection, or at every? when they
He
go-
goes, when he goes, he's the field inspector, and he's supposed to go out when there's a project in one of our city streets. He's supposed to communicate the requirements needed for that particular project, and then he goes out, and I think he goes out about 2 or 3 times. He goes out initially, and they have to explain everything to him about what they want to do, and then if it's approved, then he, when they start the work, he has to make sure they're using the proper backfill too, because we found that in the past, that some of the contractors, even some of our utility companies were not using the proper backfill.
So then the reason why I'm asking is because of the situation from this morning. And so how do we know that those contractors has applied with the city to do the work? Because I didn't see.
Did you ask them if they had a permit?
They just said that they were there to do some work.
And you didn't ask them if
And I
they had a
asked them if they had
permit?
a permit, but I'll go back and ask because I.
Well,
didn't-
We could find out.
The director can send someone up there to see if they're in compliance.
Right, because how would one know? That's what I'm saying. How would one know if they,
When I see people, I stop and ask them if they have permits. And if they don't, I communicate with the department.
well, I did get their information and we looked to see who they were and it's the third party.
Yeah, ULS.
Right.
Yeah.
But I just was like, how would we know that they even came?
Because
to
they
the
should
city?
have something, aren't they supposed to have something on display at the work site?
I don't know where they
Have
display it
something
on.
with them?
I don't know where they display it on the street offhand. And again, I don't do the administrative side, so I don't want to misspeak about all the documentation. If they're doing work on a home or they have a dumpster or something like that, they have to have a permit posted in the windows. I don't know about the street offhand, but I would say to anybody on council, if you see, or anybody in the community, if you see work being done and you believe that it may not be done without a permit, or you feel uncomfortable about it for any other reason, please report it. We can send out an inspector to take a look, confirm whether or not the work's being done safely and in compliance with city ordinances. And I will look into that, Councilwoman.
He had the right to do that. He can, I know you do.
I was just shocked by it. If they were doing the work, no one knew. 8 o'clock in the morning and you banging and clinging, dust flying everywhere, opening up roads and it's a gas line, so I just wanted to know what the proper chain of command will do. Thank you.
You're very welcome.
Maybe some more.
Sir, hold on one moment.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Thomas Gordy. I live at 1111 Butler Street. The problem I have, I don't know if it belongs in this meeting, but I need to ask the question. On the southbound side of 11th Street, there is a house. Used to be owned by an absentee landlord. The grass at that house is as tall as me, and it's become a refuge for wild animals. Everybody on Butler Street between 11th and 12th, I know, tried to keep their grass cut. Some time ago, there was a lady hired to take care of that kind of problem, and I want to know if she's still in place and if that kind of problem can get taken care of.
Okay, they're going to get someone from licensing and inspection to come over and talk to you, because
Okay.
that's a property maintenance issue.
Okay, I thank you
Okay?
so very
They'll
much.
come right over.
Thank you.
Thank you.
She'll talk later and continue with. She's gonna talk later, so you can continue with the meeting.
No decision has been made about what we talked about getting some help from L&I to help with property maintenance issues. That's a totally different
Talk
from
about
that.
this 901 ordinance.
Okay. 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 All right. Are there any other questions or comments for discussion? Anything else from you, Mr. Heyman?
Nothing today, Counselor.
Okay. And what I'd like to suggest to the committee is, well, that we're going to have a discussion with the city clerk about this ordinance. And then, Mr. Heyman, you're going to do some additional research with maybe the legal department
Sure.
as it pertains to this ordinance, to see if there's anything else that we can put in there, because what you're asking is for more substance, you know, so that we can hold people in compliance with the ordinance. Am I correct?
Correct.
Okay. Is that right, Joy? I'm serious.
Did it specify, or it's just general, it doesn't matter if it's commercial or not commercial?
It doesn't specify. I mean, I would say that anything that's done out there, it's typically just a utility company, so it's done by a,
Right, right.
yeah,
It's usually
yeah,
commercial, but
yeah.
Delcora, they're interested sometimes when it comes to sewer lines, with how much you got to take.
No,
Whether or not they take accountability onus if it's in the street or if it's at the curb, but that's why I asked.
Yeah, and this only addresses in the street, so if it's on a curb or it's on a separate area, that would be separate, so.
And Joy, we welcome your comments, so don't feel like you're, I mean, that's what these meetings are for, so that we can all come together and brainstorm, you know, the ordinances, anything that might come up, anybody has their opinion, you know, or comments or what have you. I mean, we welcome that.
Sure, of course, absolutely.
Thank you. Any comments from you, Councilman?
No, ma'am, thank you so much for the opportunity.
Okay. All right, then, if there are no additional comments or questions, then I am going to consider this meeting adjourned.
No, you're good, it's adjourned. I do this meeting, second meeting.
You had something else?
She said it's gonna be tabled until they get more discussion.
So you have an opportunity to get with legal.
It does say that the permits, it does say that we have the authorized to issue, to revoke permits, and subsequent permits if the offending person doesn't comply with it, actually, right here.
Talking in the,
I don't know if we're adjourned or not, but I will say, so it does say that backfilling of excavation in streets shall be done in such manner as meets the approval of the department, which in this case would be Public Works. So a person from Public Works could come out and look at it, which that would be Mr. Truitt, Mr. Red. And in case of neglect or failure on the part of any person to do backfilling properly, the department is authorized to refuse issuing of subsequent permits to the offending person during such time as the department may determine. So that would be the enforcement mechanism. They would not get other permits. No. You know what? This is like boilerplate wording typically, so take it from other ordinances. My concern was more the specifications about the cartway than so much the enforcement mechanism, but it actually is in there. I apologize. I could have just said that when you first asked the question, and that would have addressed it.
Mr. Heyman, instead of this meeting being adjourned, I take that back. I'm going to call for an executive session with my committee members.
Sure.
Okay, and
Sure.
you.
Sure.
Okay.
Sounds good.
Thank you.
No problem.
We'll be right back.
You're not gonna adjourn the meeting? You're gonna come back and
No,
finish?
I'm gonna come back. What I said was this meeting is not adjourned, and that I'm gonna call for an executive session and then come back. I won't need to adjourn the meeting back to executive session.
Okay.
No, because I think,
We're live still.
no, he cut it off.
Are you coming?
Come on, come on. Right. Right. Right.
Well, you just said that you was going there.
Huh?
You just said that you were going to executive session.
Yeah, I just
Coming
said
back.
that we were going into executive session. And he turned it off. After that.
You keep it running.
Okay,
He already cut it off.
Yeah. You all gonna go in there?
yeah.
Yeah.
I thought they were going to sit here. right, executive session is over. Are we live? Executive session is concluded, and I would like to get a motion from the committee, the Public Works Committee, to move the ordinance 901.13 entitled Backfilling and Repaving, that we move it to the council meeting on September 25th for its first reading.
I make a motion that we move forward with the amending the ordinance 901.13 with the expectation that we'll get some clarity on the questions and statements that was presented today.